I probably worked harder on this talk than anyone I've given, so be kind and be gentle in your reviews. Also, I learned in doing this talk, you should plan ahead and you should prepare, but not too far. So I got everything done a little ahead of time, so I added a whole lot of pictures. So sorry about that, but I find them enjoyable. And I got up to 96 slides, so yesterday I made it an even 100. So we have a little material to cover, but I promise the slides are posted so you can grab them at your leisure. There's a lot of text, so I'm not going to walk through everything, but yeah, so there's a lot there. So basically, my history and what I'm currently doing is I kind of sit in that joint between security and development, right? That's where I'm most comfortable. That's where I've lived for a long time. I do a bunch of stuff with OWASP, and yeah, these are my opinions. So I have a couple projects, App Sensor, and then one that you'll hear about in a little bit called Mana. So yeah, Jim is great. Neil, Jer, Ron, sponsors, everybody, thank you. So here's what we're going to do today. An honest retrospective. So I'm not going to lie to you. I may not tell you every specific little terrible thing that I did, but I'm going to try to give you an honest look at what it was like trying to start a program. With the intention that you can take some of this data and go home and do something about it, right? Like, you may not apply all of these. These are essentially my lessons learned and my opinion about what I learned from going through this process. You may come to different results, but this is kind of my story. And part of the reason why I approached it this way is because when Neil and Jim asked me to come talk, I have like serious imposter syndrome going on, just looking at the list of people talking. So I didn't know exactly what I was going to be able to add. It's my story, right? So I kind of have to be right in that context. So we're going to do a little story time. So this is how I see my view of myself here for this story time. I hope to engender like this vision or visual for you. I don't know if anybody remembers this, but this is the safety officer who kind of shot himself in the foot, but it's okay, right? And then he tells everybody in the crowd, it's okay, I did it, y'all are still safe, right? So hopefully you can learn and take away some of the things that I've done. In particular, context matters though, right? Because some of you, who's in a shop that has 1,000 engineers or more? 500 or more? 50 or less? Okay, awesome. So, so 1,000 or more and 50 or less are wildly different problem sets, right? And you're going to approach them differently. So my particular context, I got brought in to start AppSec. There was literally no AppSec program at this company before I got there. This company had been acquired. They were a startup, and they had been acquired by another startup that has recently been acquired by Oracle. So the company that got bought, where I got dropped in, they'd been around 15 years, but they were kind of sort of still a startup. They didn't have any security people on staff, but we have some really intelligent developers and engineers, and they're a microservices shop who already had a lot of infrastructure set up, right? So CI/CD was there. There was this DevOps mentality and program set up. That's how they run things. And there's about 350 people, of which about 150 or so are engineers, and then the rest are different kind of staff. We were bought by a company that had a significantly different makeup, right? Like, they'd been around about the same amount of time, but they look a lot more traditional. Their deployment models, their operational models are all much more traditional. And so when they bought this company, and they're 5,500 people at the time, so when they bought this company, they said, hey, y'all are doing good work, and we bought you, so we want to leave you alone, and we don't want to affect your culture, right? Like, our culture looks different, and y'all are clearly doing something that's working, so we want to try to kind of drop somebody in. So they put me in there. I am the security team, and I had worked in both of these types of environments. Basically, my job was, get stuff done, make things more secure. So this was kind of my starting point list of things that I wanted to accomplish. I was supposed to learn the environment, embed into the culture, and help translate across companies, right? So help explain one to the other. This company that had just been bought was terrified because they thought we're going to get all this red tape. The red tape company was terrified because they thought, well, this company doesn't do security, like, and now we own them and we've acquired them. So it was a bit of an odd environment. You have to secure everything, prep them for compliance, which is kind of a big swath to write over top of a company if you haven't had to deal with compliance. It's a big brushstroke. And then how can we take lessons learned from moving in this fast environment and push them up and benefit? And here's what you have to get started. We have some tools. We have some training stuff that may or may not be super applicable. And then we have policies, right? So policies that are written to work in that environment, right? That original middle environment. So I go in on the first day and I think I've got this under control, right? Like I've worked in companies before. I've seen AppSec programs work. And then the first day was a little bit more, like everybody's first day is this way, right? But I should clarify, when I've worked before, I haven't run AppSec teams before. This is my first go at it. But I was like, I've seen it happen, right? Like I've listened to talks at conferences and stuff. I'm good. So be humble. Like any environment you walk into, please be humble. So the first week was when I really started working with architecture, tooling, engineers, and I started learning a little bit about kind of how things worked within that company. And, a couple of these things, so we'll churn through some slides quickly. A couple of these things kind of make you go, whoa. Yeah, a couple of them, like I just didn't understand, and I got a little upset about, and they made me look a little odd, maybe. This is a great movie, by the way, if you haven't seen it. So some things make you angry. Best show of all time, by the way. And then, yeah, you just want to crash and cry. So you think about it a little bit over the first weekend, right? And you have a little time to digest. So it's all right. Like everything's going to be fine, right? The business is still operating, right? Like that's where you have to land. Apparently, even though you think everything's on fire, right? And honestly, some of it is. It hasn't been found yet. Like you have that going for you, right? It's okay. And honestly, they would not be paying you to do security stuff, right? Like I know there's a couple in here, who either works as a developer trying to write secure things or like in the security team trying to build actual applications, not like a service provider type. Okay, a third, half the audience. So take a break a little bit, take a breath. So what was I trying to do the first quarter? I'm going to run through this stuff pretty quickly. If you have questions, shoot your hand up. But I'm trying to get to the end, I promise. I'd much rather hear Allison's talk than my own. So basically just try to get involved was the first quarter. We had a pretty good base of things to start from, but I need to kind of get embedded in the group. And so we did pretty good with introductions. I got onto the team pretty well. I made a decent dent in like tech training, but then you realize that like you're not only training developers as a security person, you're also training like marketing, right? And that's a fundamentally different thing that you kind of get used to. Even though I'm only helping I'm trying to help the AppSec program get stood up, I have to worry about what they're doing, right? Because marketing is standing up sites that contribute to our overall security posture. So I kind of have to worry about what they're doing, right? They're posting messages like, where are you storing this customer material, right? Like I have to worry about lots of these things. I put fail on quite a lot of these things. I don't mean that like they're actual failures. I mean, I should have been doing them earlier usually. So one of the first things that I would recommend is when you go into this environment, just like seek out the people that are useful, right? And that's not always org chart driven. Like there are people that have institutional knowledge. Those are really useful people, like people who have been around for 15 years in the company and they know where all the bodies are buried. Like find those people, make friends with them, be nice, and learn the environment and tooling that'll become more important later on. So the second thing, so this is where tech lands, right? Like first quarter was a little bit of a shortened quarter. I just wanted to get in. So I figured I was gonna have this thing wrapped up Q2, right? Like I was gonna have the problem solved because I knew tech. Right? That was the environment I came from, and I knew tech. I knew static analysis. I had built one of these things before, right? Like, I can set one up. That should be pretty straightforward. Even though it wasn't the one I built, I should be able to set one up if I built one. And then I was going to leverage, Zap and dependency check and do some more training. And we've made it a little further on the training. So SaaS is a little hard, particularly on microservice environments, right? So we have many more services than we have people, right? If that's not your environment, that may break a little bit of stuff, but when you have way more services than you have people, and a team is handling a dozen services, there's half a dozen people, you have to set all those things up, right? Like you don't get them for free. And we're, what is the word, polyglot, right? So any language, and so your tooling doesn't necessarily, security tooling isn't necessarily polyglot friendly, right? Particularly if you're using modern languages. Zap's still awesome, but I didn't get to that at all. Dependency check, we did good. There's low-hanging fruit there. That's pretty fantastic. Jeremy's talk, I made fun of him when he got done. I said he must be like cursed because he's stuck with dealing with third-party libraries. So I believe in dependency check. I believe in what he was talking about this morning, and that is something that you can help developers with. So please go spend time doing that. And we did all right on training. So here's where failures start to happen. I did not formulate questions that I wanted to answer, right? I just went in and started solving stuff that I knew how to solve, right? And you can make progress, but like, are you making the progress you mean to make? Right? You're not necessarily solving the right problems. So I should have started there. Starting an application inventory. Who has a great application inventory and is confident, like they know what's going on? Awesome. So like, everybody in security needs this, right? And it's at many different layers, right? It's at the applications themselves. It's at your hosts, your bring your own device. All of these things we need to do better at, and like nobody's going after them. So at the end of this talk, I'm gonna like yell and scream. And so if you're smart and you can build software, like build one of these. Like make the right thing. Like this would contribute a lot to people like me who are having to solve these problems. Tools may not be the right place to start. You may get a lot more lift by just like talking to people or introducing processes or whatever. CI/CD is security's friend. I'm going to talk about this way more later on, but I'll pause for just a second to make something that hopefully rests in your brain the rest of the time. I guess it was during Jeremy's talk when he's talking about automatic changes to code. How can you do that? How can you have confidence to do that when you don't have a good test bed? So it is my fundamental belief that pretty much everything that the good quality security teams that I see are all depending on unbelievable amounts of underlying infrastructure. And if you don't have that infrastructure, it's going to make it way harder to do your job, right? So CI/CD, writing tests, like if you don't have CI/CD and you don't have unit tests and integration tests, it's going to be really hard to be successful, right? So maybe you invest your time in trying to get your teams to do those, basic hygiene, and it gets the additional lift that, oh, by the way, the engineers actually love that. So I told Gene my talk is basically a worse version of what he said. So I agree wholeheartedly with everything he was saying, so I got a lot of lift here from CI/CD. Third-party libraries is rotten fruit. Okay, so I'm going to move a little faster and skip a lot of this. So credential storage, we had to solve, right? Hard-coded passwords, hard-coded text, whatever. Plain text passwords. We needed to solve this. We looked around, we picked HashiCorp Vault. The only reason I mentioned that product is because I'm going to talk about it later. But there's lots of tools out here that solve this thing. So we picked this. It worked great operationally in our environment. That was a big factor, right? A lot of times security tries to push solutions on people that make no sense in the environment, right? You just pick something and drop it in and go, ye shall. That is not a good way to make friends with people, I promise. Dynamic analysis, what I did here was I found somebody, and this built into the champions later, I found somebody in QA who was interested in security and was getting kind of bored and wanted to make a job change. So he said, hey, if I kick into this, will you train me on some security stuff? I was like, sweet. So he already knew the environment. He knew how Selenium ran in the group, and I gave him, hours of extra one-on-one security training, and he gave me Zap integration and just solved that problem for me. Like it just went away. So that was fantastic, right? So find people that you can use there. This went on with security champions. I started noticing as I did training. So as I look across the room, like there's a lot of heads that are doing this number, right? But there's 6 that are going, right? And that's kind of what you get when you do a lot of training, unless you're Jim and everybody's on the edge of the seat. But those 6 are important, right? Because usually they're the ones that that are gonna care about the stuff that you're talking about. So like grab those 6 afterwards, pull them in and go, hey, is there other stuff that you want to hear about? And so that was pretty beneficial. And then a couple people in the room here actually, we noticed that the existing SDLC policy that existed worked. It was really a standards document. It said, this is the way that we run our business and we run our SDLC, and it didn't say, these are the controls we want to have, and you go implement them in a specific way. So we had to do some work at the corporate level to kind of rewrite that policy and turn it into an actual policy, and then build a standard. So yeah, I explained all that stuff, so I'm gonna skip that one. So lessons learned, pick operationally compatible tools. I'm a big believer in open source. It helps you contribute back to the community. I'll beat on that a little later. Policies do matter to an extent. Depends on your environment. That's a contextual thing. But policies can matter, particularly at scale. And then here, like, just reach out to people who have solved problems. Like, there's a lot of very smart people in this room, and you know, in lots of other places. And it turns out, like, most people are relatively nice. There are some people that are not. But if you go to somebody and you say, hey, look, you're really smart. I would like to ask you some questions. That kind of works, right? Like, people will respond and they'll answer you. And like, people that you really look up to and respect for specific things and who have deep knowledge in a specific area, they'll talk to you about that thing. In our environment, BSIM is a good community. And it's just basically all these people that build AppSec programs and have for years. And it's just this environment of people that I can call, right? So there's other ones. BSIM's kind of a buy-in community. But that was the one that kind of blew my mind when I got around there. And then please share your security knowledge, which I didn't do so great at first, but I'm trying to do better now. So metrics. So these are the next things we tried to hit. So a couple things here. Threat modeling and tracking attack surface. So threat modeling was a big deal. I probably should have done this earlier, but if you're not doing threat modeling, you should, right? That's kind of a base statement, but I'm just gonna make that assumption. The problem is nobody heard or knew what the word threat modeling was when I came in the door. Like, it was a foreign concept. They were, you know, much closer to we do agile development, which means we don't have to worry about design. You know, like, that's not real software development. So threat modeling was kind of throwing a kink in there. And so we wanted to start something simple, so we tried to approach it there. And then lots of microservices. So who does microservices? And who is comfortable in that? Of those half dozen of y'all, can you tell me, like, what your attack surface looks like? And you must run in the cloud, yeah? Fully? If you're nodding your head yes, I'm assuming your answer is we run in the cloud. Yes?
So it's a microservice, so it's a smaller attack surface, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, so if you are interested in this topic, I'm not going to ramble here, but I did do a talk about microservice security and specifically what I learned from going through that, and I think it had some useful pull-out points.
Can I ask you a serious question?
Yeah.
I hear a lot of people talk about threat modeling.
Mm-hmm.
I found that a lot of people define it differently.
Mm-hmm.
Would you tell us what threat modeling means to you as you approach your team?
Yeah, so we took a really simple thing, and my criterion was, I want the developers to draw a picture, and I want them to come up with a list of issues at the end, right? So you can certainly go much, much, much deeper. In my environment, that was good enough, right? Again, context matters. I'm not building financial services applications, right? I'm building customer, everything's behind a paid account, and it's not an open consumer app, so it's a little different threat model than everybody else. But yeah, basically we get a picture and a list of threats. Go ahead. Sorry.
How did you do threat modeling with developers
Uh-huh.
if they didn't have the a priori knowledge in the first place?
If they didn't have. Oh, so how did I introduce the concept?
How and when did you introduce threat modeling in your onboarding of security with this organization?
Yep, good question. So the first step was training everybody and kind of giving this overview of this is what I expect. And so I said, I kind of gave a quick primer on this is threat modeling in our environment. This is what we're going to do. And we took, kind of a basic stride model and said, this is what threat modeling is. I spent 30 minutes walking through with a, small groups of people. Said this is your picture, your design boxes that you're putting up there to get ARC approval. This is what it should look like after threat modeling. These are the extra bits of metadata that I want. And then I will work with you. So everybody that came through threat modeling, they have to come through me to do it the first couple times. And we'd spend 30 minutes or an hour, kind of going through. And then I built some example threat models to give them templates to work from.
You usually get, and you have a certain attack inventory you use as part of threat modeling. Don't we need to understand
Yep.
SQL injection before you do effective threat modeling?
Yes, so we don't use any specific tooling. Again, we're not doing extensive threat modeling. We don't use any specific tooling, but basically what we do is I give them a library of things that I say, you need to worry about these things. We've got services that aren't exposed to the front end. We got services that are API on this side, API on that side, or they both talk to Kafka, right? So, but we have buckets of services that this one, if you squint your eye, kind of looks like that one. So I kind of said for this class of service that you're building, for this class, these are kind of the buckets of things you want to worry about. So tracking attack surface. So this is something that I would recommend to everybody. I think Dan Cornell did a talk about something kind of similar to this a while back. But like when you start up your program and you get your routes, like if you're building a web app or something, or gRPC or something, it'll expose and it'll say, like if you start your Spring Boot app, it'll say, here's your routes, right? Well, if you can write static analysis, you can kind of get this information too. So what we did was in CI/CD, we have a little tool, and I had a couple of the developers who were interested in this. They worked on their little thing. So we built out support for a couple frameworks, and essentially it just spits out like a text file that's, list of routes, sorted and uniqued, and that gets stored in a file, and then we just diff those over time. So every time a change happens, like if I can see this much attack surface was added, like this thing went from 40 routes to now it has 45, like that's a big change that I probably need to go look at. Or if these route, if we've got a pen test coming up or something, I can kind of say to somebody, you need to go check out this specific thing because this is new, right? Like this is different. And you can hope that the developers are going to give you that, but there's a lot of lift that you can get from little things like this, right? So you can take the Unix model of little small things and you can compose them together and get a lot of overall benefit. So measuring and communicating is important. The thing that I learned with threat modeling, I had been doing it for years, but for pure developers, like I had been the one always responsible for doing it. And I was a security and developer. The benefit I got for the developers who'd never really been security people was they can get the stuff off their chest that they're really worried about. Almost every session I would walk in and somebody would go, I want to write this down. Like, we haven't even started the conversation yet. Like, what do you but really it gave them an opportunity. This is the context that gives them an opportunity to kind of get things off their chest. And just asking them that question now is really important. What are you worried about in your application? Because we can go through this list, but I may never get to that thing. They've got the domain knowledge. So, all right, we're halfway done. How are we doing on time? Yes, sir. Yeah, so sorry about that to everybody. Let's see, threat modeling. So that was in the context of metrics, which I didn't really talk about this time. But at the time, like now we measure a few more things, but at the time we were looking for how many projects were going through certain processes, how many projects have SaaS set up, how many projects are in this particular, so we've gone through a CI system transition, right? So we went from one platform to another. How many are on the old platform? How many are on the new, right? So high-level program metrics of which ones are we have a lot of services. I have a couple that I know are important that just can't get skipped, and then I have a bunch that you know what I mean? Like they may be more important or may not be, and at this point I didn't know what they were. So it was really for me, the metrics I was trying to collect at that point were more about tracking which ones have I covered, which ones have I not, and how can I know what to worry about, right? Moving into this role, I started worrying a lot more, so get your Tums ready. Also, for threat modeling, people like playing the attacker, right? Like even if they're not security people, it makes them feel like security people. Yes, sir. Yep. Yeah. So Zap is awesome. It can do quite a lot of stuff. So I should clarify, I've never been a pen tester, which would make me a little wary of it. But I called Simon up. He's a really nice guy, and he sat on the phone with me and the QA guy that I said for a couple hours actually on a couple of occasions, and kind of walked us through and said, well, you can do this, and you can do this, and you can. So we went after the important bits of the application, right? So we do not have dynamic testing just canned as part of all microservices. That is actually on the docket for this year. So I realize that's not an easy problem to solve. But those couple of important things that we knew were really important, they already had good coverage, and they had Selenium test coverage, either being APIs or web front ends. So we already had good test coverage, and Zap's plugin, Selenium plugin, works pretty well. We just had to figure out how to get the hook and connect them, right? So I thought like I was going to push a button and Zap was just going to solve that problem. But obviously a lot of people are still struggling with that, and so are we. So API security testing is one of the things this year. How are we doing on time, by the way? Am I done? Oh, well, what am I on? 52, I'm halfway. All right, so I'm going to try to run faster. All right, so how have we done? The big wins, I think, were in the first year, right? Like I got involved, we had a decent champions core team, I think, which was pretty good. Compliance, I didn't hardly do much at all. And the basics were there, right? Like the basic things that took me from I'm terrified to I'm a little more confident. They were there, but we were still far long ways off. And we hadn't really upstreamed much at all. So, yeah. So we got acquired, importantly, in this quarter. And we were looking at this app deployment tool. So Mike was talking about Kubernetes. We did not go with Kubernetes, which for our environment, given our deployment model and our needs, we picked a different one. And we kind of built some, tooling around it. But we needed to do that, and we needed to get some security fixes in place because there was some like persons going and deploying, which is always terrifying when you have lots of services going and deployments happening pretty frequently. We were starting to look at containers at that point, and then I wanted to solve runtime intelligence. So again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it, but I do have a project called AppSensor at OWASP that thinks about this thing, about this issue of runtime intelligence. And so we also wanted to kind of do some integration with other people. Another one of the things that I firmly believe is that we can get a lot of intelligence from our apps that we're just not doing today, right? So app deployment tool, we had a really great tooling people. I think, Mike, in the Q&A at the end yesterday, you were saying if secure defaults, right? If you don't default to secure, like your hose, because nobody's going to opt in, right? Like if it works and it's insecure, they're just going to keep working with it being insecure because it works, especially if they flip that switch and it doesn't work. So start with security. And so we did that, and we were trying to build up some of the base infrastructure. We looked at containers, and we did have a lot of luck with container security. I did a bunch of research, obviously. What is it, Aaron? I'm going to butcher his name. Gratafiore? Is that close? Gratafiore? Okay, thank you. So his treatise on the subject is phenomenal. But there's a lot of good papers out now. But basically, I studied that paper for like weeks, right? Trying to grok and understand all of it. And then went back to our team. And luckily, because it was greenfield, I was able to go in and say, look, this is the way we're going to do it. And here's all the security features we're going to have turned up. And since we were doing Docker, they had a lot of stuff enabled thanks to Diogo and the team there. However, with our deployment tool and some of the open source ones, the integration was not quite there at this point in time. So some of those features that were like nice to turn on, like the deployment tool couldn't get to them because the integration wasn't done yet. For runtime intelligence, I kind of got the idea deployed into the people's minds. This is an idea that kind of takes people's brains to turn on before they actually see the value there. I didn't do such a great job getting that done the first time. So for Vault, this came into, and I'll link to things here in just a second. We reused Vault as part of our operational deployment, and it turns out to be really useful in a lot of different contexts. Vault is really good at a bunch of things, and it's starting to get feature bloat in some respects, but it's got a lot of helpful things that are not just store this secure thing. Availability, for those who have forgotten, is actually part of what security is supposed to be doing. We forget that a lot of times, but when you're trying to run software, like having it available is a pretty important feature. This is something that when you're doing security engineering, you're trying to get stuff in there, like turning the thing off is not okay, right? Like you can't, that's a non-starter, and you can't do that. So when we were talking about deployments, we had to think through this a little more heavily than you might normally, because this was the thing that is pushing all of our code and turning it up and turning it on. So we had to think about that. I do think that this AppSec, OPSEC thing is an area that we don't really look at enough. So meaning the feedback loop. So how many people look through, like, how many people have web logs stored in some cluster, right? Like, hopefully you do. So you're siphoning that data off. How many people take that data and make decisions about how you run, secure your applications based on that data, right? Okay, so that's fantastic. That's more hands than have ever been up in any room I've ever been in. So that's a really simple example, but we have all this signal that we just ignore, and we never take the operational stuff back into the AppSec program, and I think that's an area where we can get a lot of lift. So we should think about that. So these are 2 blog posts about what we did with Vault. It's pretty interesting. And again, I didn't do most of this work. Other really smart people did, but it's really interesting as a use case on how to use the right tool for the right job in the right environment. And it's pretty clever. We get a lot of security benefits and operational benefits. So, all right, which ones do I want to talk about? So basically, core security libraries and source code attestation. Core security libraries are a big deal. If you're letting people just raw use the APIs that they want, they're going to use them wrong. We've seen that over and over and over again today, right? Like the talk before me was just screaming that. And Alex's talk, where he was saying, we kind of put this shim layer here to make it easy for people to do the right thing. That's kind of the route that you want to go. It also gives you the opportunity to squash whole bug classes. So Christoph Kern from Google, there's a paper and there's a really good talk where he talks about how Google went about killing off SQL injection and cross-site scripting inside the organization. And it's a phenomenal talk in and of itself, but it's a little bit pie in the sky for most of us, because the way they did that was they rewrote the drivers, and most of us don't have the option to rewrite our database driver, right? But they did, and in I think he said 11 man-months, they just squashed SQL injection, right, across all of Google. That's phenomenal, and none of us, I won't say none of us, few of us think that way about solving problems. But if we really did, that's how we should be going about doing stuff. So source code attestation, this was a cool project, basically, where we wanted to verify from commit to the actual running system, that we could verify who did what systems it went through. So this is a bunch of the kind of security stuff that we all do, but you can see that pipeline all the way through. So that was pretty fun. You have a lot of integration work. The audit log is powerful. I think Alex's talk, where he's talking today about vetting logs and what information you can get off from that, is pretty good. Hooks are obviously really good integration points. I really wish I knew that beforehand. I felt like a dummy when I came to that conclusion, but it is a really good thing. All right, last couple of things. Immutable infrastructure. I was kind of late to the game on this one. And then compliance, fast and slow checks. So the idea here is immutable infra, infra that you can just blow away and bring back up as is, right? There's Diogo Monica, I think, has a talk on reverse uptime that covers most of these concepts, so it's really good if you want to go read that. Fast and slow checks, this was something we have learned the hard way. So fast checks being little quick things that we can just verify, you're not doing this ridiculous thing, right? Or you're following our company's policy on this thing. But your slow checks are going to be the tools that take a long time to run, right? Your dynamic scanning tools. You can't run that as part of the build in most organizations, right? You might be able to pull it off, but usually not. So if you take that fast approach and just you can actually block commits. As many things as you can put in there that are like tenable for the development team, that kind of pushes you back to, right? Like, in other words, in the development environment is the best place to stop it. After that, like CI blocking is the best place to stop it. After that is like coming around, end around, after security team has to detect it and so forth. And then obviously if it's deployed in production and it's an incident, it's kind of the worst option. So we did pretty good on this, I think. Compliance kind of sucks, but I think everybody probably knew that. For the fast and slow checks, the really useful thing was creating minimum assertions and then raising the bar. So like if you literally can only say, all of our apps don't have this one issue, like that's better than what you were yesterday. Even if you have like one line that says, everybody doesn't have this problem, right? So deserialization, we don't have deserialization problems. Awesome, right? Like if you can solve that, that's fantastic. And then I think we're right here near the end. The app portfolio, this was another metrics thing. So this is, this would be a call to somebody, please fix this problem for me so I don't have to. This is a really complex area. How do I know everything that I want? And there's like no great tool support out there for it, at least not open source and or free. So I didn't mention this, sorry. When refreshing the SDLC, we went back through and started talking about some things, and it came up that I didn't do a good job of talking about privacy in the beginning. I was thinking more about security, and privacy actually matters, and people get really passionate about it. So it's a good place to kind of get wins and get people to understand that you care about their issues, so that's good. All right, so we did a lot of compliance prep last year, so that was a lot of work. Okay. All right, so what are we going to do now? So I'm going to try to buzz through this stuff. We're pretty close to the end of me yammering. Okay, so I'm not going to read all these things, but these are basically my longer list of lessons learned, and you can go read these on a slide if you particularly want to. Just a couple of real things. I think you should say no rarely. I think Dev, in his talk, he said, get to the yes. Is that right? Solve for yes. Very good. So I think that healthy security teams, this is kind of the mantra that I keep hearing repeated, like try to help your development team solve the problem. Don't just go in and say no, right? Because anybody can do that, and it's not really particularly creative, not really helpful. And it gives you the benefit that when you do actually have to say no, it's meaningful. People know that you're not trying to be a jerk. And then knowing that you should stay humble, because security is not literally the only concern that everybody has. And then one thing that was kind of caught me off guard is people really like talking about security because they're seeing this stuff in the news now. So I try to recommend like just general life security stuff to people. So I recommend to our developers, hey, use Signal, right? Like that's not a particular thing that I need to solve inside my company, but it does help people have this connection to you where you're talking about security. There's lots of things in process that you can get there. I would argue for try to do your best to build based on data and not just whims of your mind, right? Like actually collect the data that you're doing and see how you can improve the process over time. And then, requirements, architecture, design, and code, like try to solve as far left as you can. You have to affect that stuff. If you're just solving it as a code, you're done, like you've lost. For technology, there's quite a lot of things, and I'm not going to run through all of them. So some homework. So everybody has stuff to do on their flight back. Go read and or watch all of these things. I think they're very smart. Lots smarter people, and they said it way better than I will. But let's see, where was it? This last one here, enabling product security with culture in cloud. A lot of similar things to what I said. This is the team from Netflix. Yep. So does everybody know what this I believe is? Yes, no, maybe? It's a fantastic, like, older series that they've kind of resurrected, Edward R. Murrow. It was basically taking famous people and asking them to do little short write-ups of things that they, to their core, believe, and it's interesting the types of things that, so just as a hobby, it's something fun to do. So what are the core things that I believe about AppSec? I don't really think you can do security well run a program if you don't understand the language of the engineers that you're working with, right? Like, that may be blasphemous to some people, but I just don't think you're going to be effective if you just stand on the outside and say, well, look, I can pop this, right? Like, you have to be able to get to where they are. These are open for discussion from y'all, by the way. This is not, me pushing. I don't think it is reasonable to expect a security team to scale with an organization effectively, right? What's the numbers? 1 to 200, 220, something like that. One security person, 220 developers across the industry. And a lot of companies don't have security people. It's 0 to whatever that number is. So moving towards a champions model, I think, makes the most sense and helps you scale. And it helps you just like have a network that's going to constantly bring information back to you. We should spend more time on detection and response, not just prevention. Hopefully everybody's reached this point now, but we are not good enough to get it right the first time. We are never going to block everything. And oh, by the way, you get a lot of good intelligence by doing detection and response. Certain solutions actually matter more. So look at those. And here's a couple of examples. Obviously, these may or may not apply in your scenario, but there are some solutions here that exist. Maybe in your environment, they're a little different, but I think they're going to matter more than other solutions, right? And you can't protect what you don't know about. So just a little bit further. So similar to Jeremy, I'm going to give a call to action. So do something, right? Like, everybody in here is intelligent, do something. Not everybody has a huge team. I was an army of one for a while. I've grown the team a little bit, but not of us all have that, but most or all of us use some sort of open source, so you should be able to contribute back. Some of you can do it at work, right? Some of you are doing that at work, and that's fantastic and phenomenal, awesome, but most of us can do it from home. There's a lot of benefits to that, so in that regard, this is my small contribution. So this came from a 1.5 years ago conversation with Jim after Java 1. We were both like dog tired, and we ran into each other, and we were like, we're going to go back and take a nap. And as most conversations with Jim do, 3 hours later, we had this plan for something, and I spent the last 1.5 years trying to make something work. So you shouldn't be able to read this, but this is some code. And so this is the fix for that code, and that fix is one thing, right? So can anybody tell me what the problem is here? What's the problem?
It's a compare at the bottom and the top's an assignment.
That's right. So
The top one's always true.
right,
Because that assignment always works.
exactly. So if admin equals true is not your friend, right? Because and I wrote a static analyzer where we ran it as a SAS tool. We found lots of things with this thing, and there were a lot of them if admin equals true. So what's happening here is Java will treat that first one, always evaluate it to true. The second one is actually the way you should have written it in the first place. So basically, in case it wasn't obvious, sorry. This was some code that I wrote and contributed that had this problem, and this was an automated bot so there's like a GitHub plugin that exists out there now that you can install on your app, and it will go find this like one thing, right? This is all it does right now. It's pre-alpha, pre-P-alpha. Is there like a term for that? I don't know. Not good. But anyway, so it solves this one thing in an automated fashion. So the basic idea behind Mana is that you've got basically a platform that lets you write these little plugins, and the idea is that if you can solve one problem, right? Like, if I could solve this problem for the whole internet, that would make me feel warm and fuzzy, right? So if you can solve one problem and contribute one plugin, think of the impact you can have, right? So we all, I think, do have something useful to contribute. So there's docs and talks and scripts and code and organizational type things, and lots of things that people are putting out from work. So where did I go? Yeah. But I do believe that you can actually do something, so please do something. So this is there's one rule. But it actually worked one time, I'm sure of it, because I saw it happen. And when I typed it and like got the email on my phone, the notification that like the PR had been submitted, it was like 2 a.m. and I lost my mind. I was dancing around upstairs, woke my wife up. It was awesome. So it is hard to say goodbye, but that's all I have. So my favorite slide of the night. Do we have questions? I grew up like in wrestling, by the way. So. Awesome. Yeah. Yes, sir. Mike. Yep. So the question is, what did I mean by application inventory? What I mean by application inventory is I, as a program owner, we have, let's say 150 developers, 175, 200, I don't know how many microservices, right? How do I know where those things are, right? And when you get to the point of somebody who who were bought by Oracle, when you get to the scale of Oracle, like not everybody has the Google monorepo, right? Like people have different CI or different VCS systems in different places that you don't know about. Some of them are in the cloud, some are on-prem. Like they're all over the stinking place. You have to connect to all these places just to find out what you own, right? Like Peleus Hewley from Adobe, this was in a slightly different context, but he was talking about just websites. And he said when he took some open source data and looked at how many websites they owned, and his understanding, and he's not an unintelligent person, right? He's very smart. And he's been there forever, and his knowledge of how many websites they own more than doubled when he went out and started doing some research, right? So like he had run this program for years and years and years, but because of the acquisitions and the growth, he just didn't know. So in my specific case, what I mean is we run a lot of code inside. We build a lot of applications. Like when a new application stands up, your options are let people have freedom to build applications as they go, or like send them through some onerous process to register an application, right? Like, and those are two opposite ends of the spectrum, and there's things in the middle. But if I want to give people more freedom, or I have to live with it because of legacy reasons, how do I know where stuff is? And how do I know how many applications we even have, right? So that, and then collecting metadata, like how many records does this application manage? What's the cost per record if there's a breach? Like, all the things that you worry about and want to know about. Who do I call if like this application goes down? Like basic info like that. So, yeah. Oh yeah. Okay. Right. Sure. So first of all, I don't come from a pen test background, so some of this is probably ignorant. But we did have a bug bounty, actually. It was a private bug bounty. And I would characterize it as wildly unsuccessful, maybe. Is that fair? Essentially, we went in and said, go to town, right? And we knew a whole bunch of problems that we had. So like the first week, like they were out of money. I wasn't there when it started, by the way. I don't think I would have proved it. But it was kind of with that idea, show me what's out there. But I think bug bounties are really useful, but I think industry has kind of come to the conclusion that if you know you have a pile of problems, starting with a bug bounty may not be the right place to start, right? Like if you know you have these tractable things that you're already aware of, like just sticking it out there when you know you got 50 XSS that you can throw a rock and hit one, unless you just say XSS doesn't pay out, I don't know that, So we did find some useful bugs in there, but the scope was limited to the applications we knew about, right? There was no go discover our stuff. But we do get some nice security researchers that still find stuff for us, even though we don't have a bounty anymore, or it's on pause for right now. But I'm probably unqualified to talk about that, to be honest. And there's a lot smarter people that have talked about it. So, all right, Jim's kicking me out. So, thank y'all.